Alright, so section 13.6 talks about solving equations using factoring. And so we're going to talk about what a quadratic equation is. So far we've been factoring these polynomials, but I want you to notice right here, this is what a quadratic equation looks like. The reason we call this an equation is because now we have an equal sign. And so we've already talked about how to factor ax squared plus bx plus c. The difference is now, instead of an expression, we have an equation because we have that equal sign, and it's going to be equal to 0. Alright, so the first part here talks about this thing called the zero factor property. And it just says if a and b are real numbers, and if a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0. So I want you to think about, if I were to close my eyes real tight like Forrest Gump, and I think about two numbers, and if I multiply those two numbers together, and if I got 0, then all this is saying is that either the first number was 0, or the second number is 0, or they could both be 0. Alright, so we're going to figure out how to solve, say, this first problem here. And it says solve x plus 2 times x minus 1 equals 0. So we're multiplying x plus 2 and x minus 1, and it's equal to 0. Well, if those two numbers multiply to 0, then that means that either x plus 2 is equal to 0, or x minus 1 is equal to 0. So if I'm going to solve this equation here, then I need to go ahead and go minus 2 and minus 2. So those 2's will cancel. 0 minus 2 is a negative 2. Here's my first answer. X minus 1 equals 0. I need to go ahead and do the opposite, which is to add 1 on both sides. So that minus 1 and that plus 1 will cancel out. 0 plus 1 is positive 1. And so here are my two answers. So in every one of these problems here in 13.6, we're always going to end up with two answers, okay? So all we need to do is set each part equal to 0, and then we can solve. Let's try the same thing for the next one. So again, I'm going to go x minus 2 equals 0, or, x minus 3 equals 0. So now I need to go, let's add 2 here and add 2 here. So those are going to cancel. And 0 plus 2 is just 2. Do the same thing here, add 3 and add 3 to both sides. And I end up with x equals 3. So again, every one of these problems in 13.6, we should be coming up with two answers, okay? Alright, so let's take a look at the next part. Next problem says x times x plus 3 equals 0. So I take the first part, x equals 0, or the second part, x plus 3 equals 0. Well, if you notice in the first equation, it's already solved for x. There's nothing for us to do, so there's my first answer. Second part, I'm going to go ahead and just go minus 3 and minus 3. So x is equal to negative 3. All right. So for the next problem that I have here, we're going to do exactly the same thing. First part, second part. So 5x minus 2 equals 0, or 3x plus 1 equals 0. Okay. So just like we did before, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to go plus 2 and plus 2. So now I have 5x is equal to 2. Now I need to solve for x. So if I have 5x, now I need to divide by 5 on both sides. And we come up with x is equal to 2 over 5. Okay. So for the next problem here, I'll do the same thing, minus 1 and minus 1. So I end up with 3x is equal to negative 1. I need to solve for x now, so I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 3. And I'm coming up with x is equal to negative 1/3. Okay, so again, here are my two answers. So I want you to notice that sometimes we do end up with a fraction in our answer, and that's okay. Don't think that your problem is wrong if you're coming up with a fraction. It's just what it is. Not every single answer is going to be 2 and negative 7. Sometimes we end up with these fraction answers, okay? All right. So what I want you to notice about this next problem compared to the ones we've just done is that this one is not factored. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and worry about factoring this problem. Since the number in front of my x squared is a 1, I'm going to go ahead and use my shortcut, okay? So I'm going to say, okay, what's 1 times negative 63? Well, that's still negative 63. Now I want to think of numbers that multiply to a negative 63 and add up to a positive 2. So when I think of 63, the numbers that I tend to think of are 7 and 9. Okay? 7 times 9 gives me 63, but again, remember, I need to get a negative 63. Just a quick reminder, since that middle term there is positive, the bigger number here is also going to be positive, which tells me that the 7 has to be negative. So let's go ahead and remember, I can now just use my shortcut. I'm going to put x here and x here, and I'm just going to fill it in with these two numbers. The first one will be a minus 7, the next one will be a positive 9, equals 0. Okay? And now this problem is just like the way we did the others. So I'm going to say, okay, well, x minus 7 equals 0, and x plus 9 equals 0. There's my little or in the middle. So now I'm going to go ahead and say, let's add 7 and add 7. So those will cancel. X is equal to 7. Over here I'm going to go minus 9 and minus 9. And 0 minus 9 is a negative 9. So really, again, the difference between this problem here and the ones we just did, now we have to do the extra step of factoring it out. But that's why we've been learning factoring through chapter 13. All right, so the next problem here is x squared minus 5x plus 6 equals 0. Again, I'm going to go ahead and use my shortcut. So 1 times 6, that's still 6. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to a positive 6, but add up to a negative 5. So I could think of 1 and 6. I could also think of 2 and 3. So I want you to notice, since it's a positive 6, they have to have the same sign. And because my number in the middle is a negative 5, that means that both numbers are going to be negative. And if you notice, negative 2 and negative 3 multiply to a positive 6, and they add up to a negative 5. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and just use my shortcut. Equals 0. So x here and x here. And one's a minus 2 and one's a minus 3. And then we're just going to set each part equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0. Or x minus 3 is equal to 0. So now I'm going to go ahead and let's add 2 to both sides. So we get x is equal to 2. And we can add 3 to both sides. And we get x is equal to 3. All right, great. So now for the next problem that I have here, x squared minus 3x equals 0. First thing I want you to notice, this part only has two terms. So instead of me using that shortcut, I'm really just going to factor out the letter x from here. And that's going to give me x times x minus 3 equals 0. Again, I'm going to go ahead and set each part equal to 0. So x equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. Again, if you notice, this first part is already done. All I need to do now is add 3 to both sides, add 3 to both sides, and I get x is equal to 3. Okay? All right. So in this next problem here, what I actually need to do first is I need to distribute this. So that's going to give me a 3x squared and a minus 1x is equal to 14. If you notice, all the problems we've been factoring, we had 0 on the other side. So I need to move this 14 this way. Okay? Since I'm going to cross the equal sign, the sign of my number is going to change. That's now going to become a minus 14. Okay? So now, I can't use my shortcut here because the number in front of my x squared is not a 1, right? I have a 3. So I still have to do my grouping process. Okay, so let's remember grouping. I'm going to take my calculator, okay, and I'm going to take 3 times negative 14, makes it negative 14, okay. We're coming up with a negative 42, okay. So now, right here, I'm going to think of my number. Let's see, negative 42. All right, I want to find two numbers that multiply to a negative 42, but they need to add up to a negative 1. So again, when I think of 42, Just because I know my multiplication table, I typically think of 6 and 7. Since my middle number here is negative, the bigger number is going to be negative. This one's going to be positive. All right, so let's see if we can factor this out now. So we're going to go, 3x squared plus 6x minus 7x minus 14 equals 0. Okay. This is reminding me of how to do grouping again. I'm going to box the first two. So out of 3x squared plus 6x, we can factor out a 3x. Sorry about that. And I'm left with an x plus 2. Out of these two, I'm going to circle the last two. I can factor out the number negative 7. I'm also left with an x plus 2. Okay. So I can see, here's my common factor. I know I'm doing that right. Those two pieces need to match up. That's an x plus 2. This is a 3x minus 7, okay, equals 0. Now we can start setting each part equal to 0. X plus 2 equals 0. Or 3x minus 7 equals 0. Okay. So now I have minus 2 and minus 2. So x is equal to a negative 2. There's my first answer. Okay. Let's go plus 7 and plus 7. So 3x is equal to 7. Then we need to finally divide both sides by 3. And we come up with x is equal to 7/3. So this problem was a little bit longer. We had to do a couple more steps. But again, what I like about it is it's reminded me in how to do grouping, right? Okay. So now, same thing with this next problem. The first thing I need to do, I need to rewrite this. I'm going to move that 2x over. So that's going to become x squared. Right now it's negative. When I cross the equal sign, it's going to become a positive 2x minus 15 equals 0. All right, so now the next thing I need to do is I can go ahead and use my shortcut because that number is a 1. So 1 times negative 15 is still a negative 15. When I think of 15, the numbers I think of typically are 3 and 5. My middle number here is positive, so my bigger number is going to be positive, which means the 3 is going to be negative. Okay, so I'm going to write x here and x here. Here's my equal 0, and I'm just going to fill in the blanks with these. Minus 3 and plus 5. Okay. So now we can set each part equal to 0. X minus 3 equals 0. Or x plus 5 is equal to 0. So we're going to go plus 3 and plus 3. And so here I get x is equal to a positive 3. I need to go minus 5 and minus 5 here. And we end up with x is equal to negative 5. So again, 2 answers every single time, right? Okay. So let's keep working. I'm going to take a look here. Again, one thing I notice, I have 2 terms. So I'm not going to worry about grouping or anything like that. What I do want to do is I want to see if I can factor anything out of both those pieces. And it looks like between 12 and 16, we can take out a 4 and an x. And I'm left with a 3x and a minus 4. Okay. Because again, 4 times 3, 12x squared. 4 times 4, negative 16. All right. Now I'm going to set each part equal to 0. So 4x is equal to 0. Or 3x minus 4 equals 0. So from here, I'm just going to divide both sides by 4. I get x equals 0. Over here, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So 3x equals 4. Divide both sides by 3. And again, I get x equals 4/3. Right? Good. All right. So this next one here is x squared is equal to 49. Again, I need to get that 0 on the other side. So I'm going to move the 49 over. That's going to become x squared minus 49 equals 0. If you recall from 13.5, when we did the difference of squares, I can use that formula here. That's an x squared, that's going to be an x, and that's going to be an x. Remember, 1 is minus, 1 is plus. Don't forget my equals 0. If this is 49, then square root of 49 is going to be 7, right? So now we're just going to set each part equal to 0. X minus 7 equals 0, or x plus 7 equals 0. So I'm going to add 7 to both sides on the first one. I get x equals 7. I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides on the second one. And we end up with x is equal to a negative 7. All right. So this is the last problem here out of 13.6. And again, I'm going to work through it. We're going to work through it slowly to make sure that we get every step right. So again, on the right side, we want to get 0. So the first thing is I need to move this 13. So I'm going to put a minus 13 underneath it. And I'm going to put that negative 13, again, also under the negative 11, because those will be the terms that I can combine. And I'm going to need to do the same thing with a 6x over here. Since it's a negative 6x, I'm going to put a positive 6x. And I'm going to put it underneath the 8x, because that's the one that I can combine it with, right? So now I'm just going to come straight down. 3x squared. 8 plus 16, or plus 6, I'm sorry, 14x. Negative 11 minus 13, negative 24. Those are going to cancel, those are going to cancel, which means I have 0 on that side. Okay, so now I'm going to factor this problem, right? And because my number in front of my x squared is a 3, I have to use my grouping method. So again, I'm going to take my calculator, and I'm going to say, okay, what's 3 times negative 24? Okay, negative 72. Okay, so now, let's see, negative 72. All right, so I need to think of numbers that are going to multiply to a negative 72. Oh, let's see. Well, I know 8 times 9 gives me 72, but the difference of those numbers would be 1, and I need the difference of those numbers to be 14. So let's take a look. What else could we use? 4 and 18. Okay, and so 4 and 18 multiply to a 72, and if I make this one here positive and this one here negative, that should give me a positive 14. Okay, if you're wondering how I came up with this, all I did is I took 8, I cut it in half, so it gave me 4. Well, that 2 that I divided the 8 into, I multiplied it by the 9, and there's my 18. So I'm really just kind of playing with the factors of those numbers, okay? All right, so let me go ahead and write this out. 3x squared, oops. You can always use a multiplication table if you need to. It might make it a little easier. Okay, 3x squared, let's see, minus 4x plus 18x minus 24 is equal to 0. Okay, so I'm going to box the first 2. Out of here, I can factor out an x. I'm left with a 3x minus 4. I'm going to circle these 2. Out of 18x and 24, I can factor out a 6. 6 goes in 18 3 times. 6 goes into 24 4 times. Okay. So there's my common factor, 3x minus 4. And here's my other factor, x plus 6, okay, equals 0. And I'm just going to set each part equal to 0 now. So we're going to go 3x minus 4 equals 0. And x plus 6 is equal to 0. So here I need to go plus 4, plus 4. So 3x is equal to 4. We'll divide both sides by 3. And I'm going to end up with x is equal to 4/3. Okay. So let me move the other one over a little bit. Okay. And so we had, what was it, x plus 6 is equal to 0. Okay, so we're going to go minus 6 and minus 6. And so the second answer we get is x is equal to negative 6. All right, good deal.